Hello and welcome to He Chose You. I'm Joel Lamp. Previous episodes, we've covered such fascinating topics like the great debate between Martin Luther and Erasmus of Rotterdam as it came to the issue of free will. In other series, we've actually covered the life of William Tyndale and his martyrdom. On today's show, we're once again going to go back in time and visit first century Rome. This will be an exciting show. Take a little imagination, but as always on this show, we encourage you to grab something to write on and something to write with. You will want to take notes. We'll be right back.
TCT presents He Chose You. Discover God's journey in preserving His Word throughout time. Walk within the lives of kings, heroes, and heroines, all to the glory of God. Join TCT as we answer why He chose you.
Hi, and welcome back to He Chose You. Once again, I'm Joel Lamp. This is going to be an exciting show. It's going to take a little imagination as we go back in time together. Now, on previous episodes, we've covered such fascinating topics like the great debate between Erasmus and Luther as it came to the issue of free will, where I asked you to put yourself in a 16th century environment. Today, I'm asking you to do something similar. Let's go back to first century Rome. With no further discussion concerning where we're at because we're in first century Rome, let's introduce one of the most overlooked but most interesting men of that day. He goes by the centurion Julius. Julius, please come on over.
It's good to be with you, brother.
Thank you for having us.
Good to be with you. I'm glad to see the people you have gathered to hear my story.
What is your story? Why do we know who you are?
Well, why do you know who I am? Probably because of our dear brother Luke, who made a journal of St. Paul's trips. And in the latter part of his book, he said that when it was decided we would go to Jerusalem, a centurion by the name of Julius, a member of the imperial guard, would take us. That was me. Many people have asked me who have read his account is why in verse, or why did it say then that when we arrived at Sidon, Julius, out of kindness to Paul, let him go to visit his friends? The strange thing about that, the governor had told me when he assigned me to take this man named Paul and 280 some other prisoners to Rome. He said, Julius, remember, if you lose one prisoner, you will die. People, other soldiers, other centurions have asked me, why did you let a man go? To get off a ship by himself to visit friends. There were many strange events that led to that day that I let him go. Let me begin, though, with where I came from. I was born in a small village in the foothill of the Alps, maybe a 14-day walk north of Rome. It was an idyllic village. A small stream ran through it. The valley ran up to the trees. The huge trees were like a wall. It was like nothing could harm us. Nothing could make it through those trees. Except the barbarians. Our village had never been attacked, but we had heard stories about the barbarians. And one day my father went to hunt, and as he went to walk out of the village, my mother had sent me to the stream to get water. My father turned and he waved at me. I longed for the day that I would be old enough to travel with him, that I would have the ability to take an arrow and put it through the heart of a stag. I turned and looked at my mother, and she waved at him and she threw him a kiss. I looked up in the sky and I saw a sky that was so blue. I had never seen a sky like that. And as I walked to the stream, I heard thunder. And my first thought was, how can there be thunder without clouds? And then I looked at the tree line, and coming out of the tree line were 100 barbarians on huge black horses. I saw my father. He pulled an arrow from his quiver. He brought it up to shoot, and they ran him through with a spear. My mother hollered at me. She said, run, Julius, run to the trees, to the trees. And I couldn't leave my mother. I dropped my bucket, and as I ran back through the village to her, a huge horse passed between us, and when he was gone, blood was coming from my mother's chest, and as she grabbed it, she fell to her knees, and she reached out to me, and I said, Mama, what have they done? She grabbed me, and she pulled me down into the dirt, and she said, Julius, lay here and die with me. She started taking blood and putting it on my face and my hair, and she said, Julius, they will see that you are covered with blood, and they will pass you over. And I looked at her in her eyes, and I said, Mom, I love you. And she looked at me, and though I knew she had always loved me, I had never seen such love. Never. And she said, I love. And the last breath of her nostrils blew up a cloud of dust into my eyes, and I closed my eyes. There were 73 people that lived in our village, and when the barbarians were gone, I was the only one alive. Several days later, a garrison of Roman soldiers came through. I was sitting by my mother, and they adopted me. And I would see Roman soldiers occasionally, and I always wanted to be one. And now, although a young boy, I traveled with them, and I cooked for him, and I got water, and at times a centurion would let me help him get his armor on, and I could not wait for the day that I could sign my contract, because I had one goal in life, and that was to find the man who killed my mother and to kill him.
Understandably so.
And it came to the point that I did sign my contract. And every man that I killed was the man who killed my mother. After many years, I was transferred to an outpost called Jerusalem. And it was there that my reputation of being so good at death preceded me. It was there that they put me in charge of crucifying the criminals.
It was your job to actually nail the wrists and the feet?
Nail them to the cross. And the sad thing is, I look back on it, sir, is I enjoyed it. Because every man I nailed to the cross was the man who killed my mother. And then one day, there was a man, they brought him into the garrison headquarters. He had been with Pilate, and I heard he had been to see King Herod. And I was to take him up to the portico where Pilate was, and there was a large crowd of Jews. It was the time of the Passover, and thousands of Jews. And this man went and stood next to Pilate, and I stood back. I knew my place. And Pilate said to the crowd, "As it is my custom, I will release to you a prisoner. Shall I release to you Barabbas, a murderer and a thief, or shall I release to you Jesus of Nazareth?" And the crowd cried out, "Give us Barabbas." Pilate then got up and brought Jesus back behind a curtain where I was standing, and I overheard the conversation. And he said, "Why will you not answer any questions? Do you not know that I have the power to take your life?" And this man looked at him and he said, "I have the power to lay down my life and to take it up." They say that you're the king of the Jews. You have said it right, but my kingdom is not of this earth. Pilate then began to ask him more questions, and he just stood there. As he was taking him back to where the crowd could see him, a message came from Pilate's wife. And he opened it. I could read part of it. What I found out later was it was from his wife, who said, "Have nothing to do with this man. I have been tormented by dreams." Pilate took the note and crumpled it and let it fall to the floor. He addressed the crowd, "I'll have this man flogged." So it was my job to take him downstairs, and they stripped him of his clothes. And I didn't understand it at the time, sir, but over in the corner, 2 soldiers were making a crown out of thorns. And after they had stripped his clothes on and kicked him in the back of the knee so he fell, one man came up and grabbed him by the hair and yanked his head back. And the other one took the crown of thorns and shoved him down on his head. Blood began to flow down his back, over his ears. As it came down his forehead, it went from his eyebrows to his cheeks, and it looked like he was crying great drops of blood. They tied him to the post, and the man with the whip, the cat of 9 tails, came back and he hit him. And that was when it was amazing. I don't know how many men I had seen flogged, but I knew one thing always happened. That first strike, they screamed like they were dying, and this man made not a sound. I'd been in Jerusalem for some time, and I had been up to the temple on Passover when they would do the sacrifices. And one thing that always amazed me was the little lambs that they carried would be bleating and baying, and the cacophony of the lambs was so loud you could hardly hear anything. And yet when they were laid down in front of the high priest and he took the knife and he sacrificed them, they made not a sound. And this man didn't either. And they hit him and they hit him. They ripped flesh from his back and his legs and his arms. They raised him up and untied his hands and threw a purple cloak on him and said, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And I took him back up to Pilate. Pilate said, "I've had this man flogged. What shall I do with him now?" And the crowd cried, "Crucify him." He had a bowl of water brought out and he washed his hands, and Pilate said, "I wash my hands of the innocent blood of this lamb." And he turned to me and he said, "Julius, do your job." We took him back down. We tied the crossbeam of the cross on his shoulders. And as we walked, well, you see, the Jews would not allow us to crucify anyone within the walls of the city. We had to take them outside the wall.
For what reason was that?
One of their laws or regulations, I don't know. I never really understood the Jews. I didn't understand their laws. I knew they killed a lot of lambs. And this man, as I walked him out there, I kind of thought he was like a lamb being led to slaughter. And I would be the one who'd sacrifice him. As we walked through the streets, I would start to see him stumble, and I'd kick him right in the back of the knee so he would fall and his knees would hit the cobblestone. And the weight of the cross would drive his face into the cobblestone, and everywhere he went, he left blood. There was a trail of blood that left from Pilate all the way to Calvary. And when we got there, we'd found another man to carry the beam. We threw it down. I threw him on the ground. I looked at him, and I took the nail in my hand, and I looked at him, and suddenly I froze. For he was looking at me. And what I saw was what I saw from my mother, an inexpressible love that pierced my heart. And it made me angry. And I hit the nail, and I hit the nail, and I hit the nail. When I turned to walk over him, his eyes were surely closed, and I kicked him in the ribs. I threw his other arm down, and I looked at him again. He was looking at me with those eyes and I hit the nail, and I hit the nail, and I hit the nail. As they raised him up, he looked into the heavens and he cried, "Father, forgive them." At the time, I thought the words meant nothing. And then he looked right at me and he said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do."
Did you think he was just crazy at this time? Delusional?
Sir, at that moment, I didn't think anything. When you're in the business of killing, at moments like that, you're simply numb. But that man would rob years from my life. For every night when I would close my eyes, I would hear the echo of that hammer And I would hear those words, Father, forgive them. And I didn't understand. Well, this man, later in the day, it became dark. They gave him vinegar. People were screaming at him. And then he cried out, "It is finished." He looked into the heavens and he said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And he died. It took days for a man to die on the cross. And he died. Gaius, my centurion, pointed at him and he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." And I'm sure your Roman citizens here understand this. Caesar's name was Diu, Son of God, and what Gaius did was Gaius committed treason by claiming that this dead man was the Son of God. I could have killed him on the spot. But I had been given orders to help Pilate prepare for his return to Caesarea Philippi, and I left. I had heard rumors, though, when I got to Caesarea Philippi, that this man whom I had crucified had risen from the dead. I did not see it. I was not a witness, but it was a rumor. And there were times that I thought, if it's true, what will he do if he finds me? Well, a number of years later, after more campaigns, I was awarded the rank of centurion, a member of the Imperial Regiment. And there was a man that had been brought up from Jerusalem, a man by the name of Paul. He was from Tarsus, and the Jews down there were wanting something done. I don't remember. And the governor was questioning him, and King Agrippa was there. And I think Festus couldn't find anything wrong with him. So Festus finally said, "I'll just have him flogged." And this man, Paul, says, "Excuse me, I am a Roman citizen. You cannot flog me. I appeal my case to Caesar." And the governor said, "Your choice." And he turned to me and he said, "Julius, take this man and the other prisoners that we have, go to the coast, conscript a ship, and take them to Rome." I did that, and as we sailed about the 11th hour, as we sailed to the west, the sun was beginning to set. The horizon of the sea and the orange of the sky made such a perfect line. We turned to the north to Sidon, and this man, who had been tried by 2 governors and interviewed by a king, I had chained to the post of the mast of the ship. I did not want to lose him. And as I was walking away from the railing of the ship, he calls to me. He said, "Centurion, do you know Jesus of Nazareth?" I walked to him and I said, "Why would you ask me such a stupid question?" He said, "Jesus Christ was the eternal Son of God, born of a virgin, lived a perfect life, was crucified by the Jews, was buried, rose from the dead, ascended into heaven. And I was on my way to Damascus to persecute his followers when he stopped me in a great light. And he said, 'Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?' And sir, I began to shake, my knees, my hands. I looked at him and I said, 'Sir, you might have persecuted his followers. But before I was a centurion, I was a soldier in Jerusalem, and it was my hand that held the hammer that nailed him to the tree. And if what you tell me is true, if he is the Son of God, if he rose from the dead, what am I supposed to do?' He said, 'Centurion, unchain me.' I undid the lock. I was on my knees. And he put his arms around my neck and he whispered in my ear, he said, 'Julius, it was evil men with evil desires who sought evil outcomes that caused you to do this evil thing. But in that evil thing, Julius, Christ paid for the sins of the world, and that also included yours.' I said, 'But yes, but what shall I do?' And he said, 'Julius, when your centurion said, surely this man was the Son of God, did you believe him?' And I told Paul, I said, from what I had seen, the way he suffered, his innocence, the way he died, I was afraid to believe it if he was. And he said, you believe it today? I said, yes, sir. And he said, Julius, in the name of Jesus, I forgive you. Just as if Jesus was holding in your arms, Julius, I forgive you. We sat up much the night and talked, and I went up to the front of the ship, and I laid down on ropes, and I closed my eyes, and for the first time since that day on Calvary, I did not hear the echo of the hammer. I did not hear those words, Father, forgive them, for I knew I was. We finally got to Rome, and the time would come that Paul was writing a letter to the Christians in the city of Colossae. And I was transcribing for him. And he said, God made you alive in Christ, though you were dead in your trespasses and sin and the uncircumcision of your heart. He canceled the written code, the law which stood against you and condemned you. He took it away, nailing it to the cross. And Paul looked up at me and he smiled and he said, Julius, that's for you. Will you make me a promise, Julius? And I said, what, Paul? He said, when you go into the world after I'm gone, everyone you meet, I want you to give them a nail. And I want you to ask them to put it somewhere where they see it every day. And teach them to say to themselves, the law which condemned me has been canceled and taken away and nailed to the cross. And Julius, when you go into the world, you tell them your hand held a hammer. Because they'll listen to you, Julius. Will you promise me that? And I said, yes. It was some time later that a new emperor came and he was thrown in the dungeon, and one night I got a call to take him to the executioner. And I went to his cell and I said, Paul, it's time. He said, I know, Julius. I said, Paul, I loved you more than I loved my mother and father. You gave me life. He said, Christ gave you life, Julius. And I stood there and he took me by the arm and he said, let's go. And we walked to the executioner, and Paul knelt down, lowers his head onto the block. And I looked at him and I said, Paul, I love you. And as he turned and he looked at me, I saw the eyes of my mother. I saw the love of Jesus, and I saw this man who loved me. And he said, Julius, I love. And the axe fell. I walked to the garrison headquarters. I got my gear. I walked out of Rome, and today I'm here with you and your friends. And I want you to know, Joel, and I want each and every one of you to know that this man whom I killed died for you. He rose for you. He ascended into heaven and fills the universe for you. And he will come for you. And every time you see a nail, I want you to remember that the law which condemned you was taken away and canceled and nailed to the cross. And my hand held the hammer. Some of you might be overwhelmed with what you've done, like I was. But our dear brother John wrote in a letter, he said, even when our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart. When I had heard that, I thought back of the many years that I carried the burden of my guilt that consumed me. And I tell people today who talk to me, I tell them, Jesus Christ whom I killed is bigger than your guilt. And I want to thank you for the opportunity for the people that you have gathered just to hear part of my story. If all of it were written, it would make a great book. But what I've told you is the most important. And sir, I want to give you a nail to remind you that the law which condemned you was canceled and taken away. and nailed to the cross. I heard that there is a garrison in this area looking for me, and if they find me, I could very well be crucified, but my story today is too important to die today, and I must leave.
Before you go, I think the question on everybody's mind, if you could go back in time and not do it, would you change anything? Or with what you know now, the power of being saved, would you do it?
You know, it's a terrible thing, Joel, sometimes to be used as an instrument of God. Somebody said to me once, and they were talking of something from the Hebrew Scriptures, that the Lamb of God must be sacrificed. And I do not say it of myself, but many have said, Julius, you were the high priest. But Christ is actually our high priest. But would I change anything, sir? Absolutely not. Because if I changed any one thing, I would not be here, and Christ would not be my Lord, and hell and perdition would await me. So, sir, not one thing.
You know, I've had a chance to interview numerous people, heads of states, famous politicians. This had to be one of the most powerful interviews I think I've ever been a part of. And I just can only say thank you.
It's only Christ. It's only Christ. I must leave.
Safe travels. As we move back into modern time and we leave one of the most powerful shows I think we've ever done here on He Chose You, this is a interesting, I don't even have the words for it. It's a reminder. You know, the story of Julius is a fascinating one, not because of we now have a face and a name and a backstory to the guy that drove the nail into the wrists into the feet of Christ. It's a backstory because the executioner of Christ is forgiven. Some of you watching right now feel like you have done the unforgivable, that you are in a situation where something was so great in your past that you can't be saved by. I challenge you to go back and listen to this show again, because I can promise you, if the executioner of Christ is in heaven with him now, I promise you'll be there too, no matter what you've done. Thanks for watching He Chose You. We'll see you soon.
This has been a TCT Network exclusive production.